Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story that Hollywood got spectacularly wrong. When you think of Roman gladiators, you probably picture Russell Crowe flexing his muscles in the Colosseum, fighting for honor and freedom. You imagine noble warriors, disciplined athletes, men who lived and died by the sword with dignity intact. But here's the thing about history. It's rarely as clean or noble as we'd like it to be. The reality of gladiator schools was far more complex, far more disturbing, and infinitely more human than any movie has ever dared to show you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Because tonight, we're going to explore one of Rome's most uncomfortable truths. How the gladiator schools, those supposedly honorable training grounds for warriors, were actually elaborate networks of male prostitution, where the line between entertainment and exploitation blurred beyond recognition. This isn't a story about heroes. It's a story about power, control, and what happens when human beings become commodities in the most literal sense. You're about to discover that everything you thought you knew about gladiators was carefully constructed mythology, designed to hide a reality so uncomfortable that it took historians nearly 2,000 years to start talking about it openly. So settle in, because this journey into the underbelly of the Roman Empire is going to change how you see one of history's most romanticized institutions forever. The commodity market of human flesh. You wake up in Rome 73 AD, and the morning air carries the scent of olive oil, sweat, and something else. Something that makes your stomach turn. It's the smell of fear, mixed with the metallic tang of blood that never quite washes out of the training grounds. You're standing outside a gladiator school in Capua, the same city where Spartacus once led his rebellion. But this morning, rebellion is the furthest thing from anyone's mind. The building before you doesn't look like the grand academy you might expect. It's more like a prison crossed with a brothel, and that comparison isn't accidental. The walls are high, topped with iron spikes, and the windows are barred, not to keep intruders out, but to keep the inhabitants in. This is a ludus, a gladiator school. But calling it a school is like calling a slaughterhouse a restaurant. Technically accurate, but missing the point entirely. As you approach the main entrance, you notice the men lingering nearby. They're not spectators or casual observers. These are customers, and they're here for a very specific kind of entertainment. Some wear the togas of wealthy merchants, others the more practical tunics of middle-class Romans. What they have in common is the way they eye the building with a mixture of anticipation and barely concealed shame. They know what they're here for, and they know society officially disapproves. But that hasn't stopped them from making this journey. The lanista, the owner and manager of this establishment, greets these men with the practiced smile of someone who's built a fortune on human misery. His name is Marcus Cressus Dives, and he inherited this ludus from his father, who inherited it from his father before him. 3 generations of Dives men have made their living by training gladiators. But training for what, exactly? That's where the official story starts to fall apart. You see, gladiator schools weren't just about preparing men to fight in the arena. In fact, most gladiators would only fight a handful of times in their entire careers, if they were lucky enough to have careers at all. The economics simply didn't work that way. Training a gladiator was expensive. Feeding them, housing them, providing medical care, weapons training, and equipment. If the only return on investment was the occasional arena appearance, these schools would have gone bankrupt within months. So where was the real money coming from? You're about to find out, and it's going to make you uncomfortable. The first clue comes from the layout of the building itself. As you're given a tour by one of Dives' assistants, a greasy man named Gaius, who keeps leering at the younger gladiators. You notice that the sleeping quarters are designed very differently from what you'd expect in a military barracks. Instead of large communal rooms, there are dozens of small, private chambers, each barely big enough for a single bed and a wash basin. The doors have locks, but not the kind that lock from the inside. Privacy is important, Gaius explains with a wink that makes your skin crawl. Our gladiators need their rest, and our patrons need their discretion. He doesn't elaborate, but he doesn't need to. The implication hangs in the air like incense in a temple, cloying and impossible to ignore. The training schedule is equally revealing. While there are indeed weapon sessions and physical conditioning, a significant portion of each gladiator's day is blocked out for what Gaius euphemistically calls private lessons. These sessions don't take place in the main training yard where other gladiators might observe. Instead, they happen in those small, lockable rooms, and they last anywhere from an hour to an entire afternoon. The gladiators themselves tell the real story, though not in words. You can read it in their faces, the blank expressions they wear when certain patrons arrive, the way their shoulders tense when Gaius calls their names, the careful distance they maintain from the walls when walking through the corridors, as if afraid of being cornered. These are not the proud warriors of your imagination. These are men who have learned to survive by compartmentalizing parts of themselves, by turning their bodies into a service they can provide while keeping their minds somewhere else entirely. The pricing structure makes everything crystal clear. A training session with a veteran gladiator costs significantly more than a session with a newer recruit. The more famous the gladiator, the more victories under his belt, the more scars on his body, the higher the fee. But here's the thing. Gladiators weren't paid for these sessions. Every denarius went straight to the lanista. The gladiators were property, and like any other property, their owners could rent them out however they saw fit. Marcus Dives explains the business model with the casual brutality of a man who's never questioned the ethics of his profession. Look, he says, gesturing toward the training yard where a dozen men are practicing sword work. These gladiators are investments, expensive investments. I feed them, I house them, I train them, I pay for their medical care when they get injured. Arena fights are unpredictable. A gladiator might die, might get permanently disabled, might simply not perform well enough to earn another booking. But this, he waves toward the private quarters. This is steady income, reliable, low risk. This he's referring to as prostitution, though he never uses that word. Romans had dozens of euphemisms for it. Private entertainment, companionship services, personal training, therapeutic sessions. The language might have been creative, but the reality was straightforward. Gladiator schools were brothels that happened to also prepare men for occasional combat. The system was brutally efficient. New gladiators, usually slaves captured in war or men who had sold themselves to pay off debts, would arrive at the ludus expecting to be trained as fighters. And they were trained as fighters, but that was never the whole story. Within days of arrival, they would be introduced to the other side of their duties. There was no choice in the matter. Refusal meant punishment, starvation, or death. Compliance meant survival, and possibly even a form of twisted prosperity. Some gladiators, the ones who proved particularly popular with patrons, could earn privileges, better food, more comfortable quarters, small personal possessions. The best could even hope to eventually buy their freedom, though the math was deliberately designed to make this nearly impossible. A gladiator might earn his freedom after 10 or 15 years of service, by which time he would be too old and too damaged to build a real life outside the ludus. As your first day at the gladiator school draws to a close, you watch the evening routines unfold. The gladiators bathe in a common area, washing off the sweat and oil from their training, preparing themselves for whatever the night might bring. Some have visitors scheduled, wealthy Romans who will spend the evening in those small, private rooms. Others will spend the night alone, perhaps the lucky ones. The lanista makes his final rounds, checking on his investments, counting his profits from the day. For him, this is just business. For the gladiators, it's life, or what passes for life when you're a commodity in someone else's empire. Tomorrow will bring more training, more private sessions, more of the same routine that defines existence in a Roman gladiator school. And you're beginning to understand that the real battles these men fought weren't in the arena at all. They were fought every day in small rooms with locked doors, where the only victory was psychological survival. The architecture of exploitation. You return to the ludus the next morning, and this time you're armed with knowledge that makes everything look different. The building that seemed imposing yesterday now reveals itself as something far more sinister. A carefully designed machine for the exploitation of human bodies, engineered with the same precision Romans applied to their aqueducts and roads. The architecture tells the story that the lanista would prefer to keep hidden. As you walk through the main courtyard, you notice details that escaped your attention before. The training area is positioned so that it's visible from multiple vantage points throughout the complex. This isn't for the benefit of instructors monitoring their students' progress. It's for the entertainment of patrons who like to window shop before making their selections. There's a raised viewing area along one side of the courtyard, furnished with comfortable chairs and shaded by awnings. Servants circulate with cups of wine and plates of honeyed dates. The men seated here aren't watching training exercises. They're conducting business. You overhear fragments of conversation that make your blood run cold. The Thracian has excellent muscle definition. One merchant comments to his companion, gesturing toward a gladiator practicing with a short sword. But I prefer the Germanic type. More substantial. His companion nods knowingly, and they continue their appraisal as if they're discussing livestock at a market, which, in many ways, they are. The viewing area connects directly to what Gaius calls the consultation rooms, a euphemism so transparent it's almost insulting. These rooms are where patrons can meet with gladiators before committing to a private session. The rooms are small, windowless spaces furnished with nothing but 2 chairs and a small table. The meetings that take place here are negotiations, though only one party has any real power to negotiate. You watch as a gladiator named Titus, a former Gallic warrior captured 3 years ago, is summoned to one of these consultation rooms. He's a mountain of a man, scarred from multiple arena fights, with arms like tree trunks and a back that speaks of years of hard labor. But as he walks toward the consultation room, his shoulders slump almost imperceptibly. He knows what's waiting for him, and for just a moment, his carefully maintained warrior facade cracks. The patron waiting for him is a soft-bodied Roman senator named Lucius Flavius, a man who's built his political career on speeches about traditional Roman values and the importance of maintaining moral standards. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a gladius, but irony doesn't pay the bills at a ludus. Through the thin walls, you can hear fragments of their conversation. Flavius is specific about his requirements, describing acts that would make a brothel keeper blush. Titus responds in monotone, agreeing to terms he has no power to refuse. The transaction is concluded with the exchange of coins, not to Titus, of course, but to Gaius, who hovers nearby like a vendor at a fish market. What strikes you most about this system is how thoroughly institutionalized it is. This isn't happening in back alleys or hidden locations. It's taking place in broad daylight, in a complex that operates with the full knowledge and tacit approval of Roman authorities. The ludus pays taxes, maintains proper documentation, and follows all the relevant regulations. The only difference between this and any other legal business is the nature of the services being provided. The living quarters reveal even more about the true purpose of the establishment. Each gladiator's cell, and they are cells, not rooms, contain several items that have nothing to do with combat training. There are oils and perfumes, cosmetics for covering scars or bruises, and clothing that's distinctly non-military in nature. Some cells contain costumes, a centurion's uniform, a barbarian chieftain's fur cloak, even a priest's robes. These aren't for historical accuracy in training exercises. The medical facilities at the ludus are extensive, but not in the way you might expect. Yes, there's equipment for treating combat injuries, broken bones, sword cuts, sprains from weapons training. But there's also a disturbing array of treatments for conditions that have nothing to do with arena fighting. The resident physician, a Greek slave named Nicias, maintains supplies of remedies for various infections, treatments for internal injuries that couldn't possibly result from sword work, and an extensive collection of drugs for pain management that goes far beyond what combat training would require. Nicias himself is a study in moral compromise. He's a learned man, trained in the best medical schools of Alexandria, who ended up as a slave through a series of bad debts and worse decisions. He knows exactly what's happening in his medical facility, and he's made peace with it in the way that people do when the alternative is their own destruction. I treat what I see, he explains when you ask about the unusual nature of some of his patients' injuries. I don't ask questions, and I don't judge. That's not my job. But you can see the weight of that choice in his eyes, the way his hand shakes slightly when he examines certain patients, the careful distance he maintains from the Gladiator's stories. The bathing facilities are another revealing feature. Roman baths were typically communal spaces where men would socialize, conduct business, and relax together. But the baths at the Ludus are designed differently. There are private bathing chambers, each equipped with heated water and expensive soaps. These aren't for the gladiators' personal comfort. They're preparation areas, places where they can be cleaned and groomed before their appointments. The water in these private baths is changed frequently throughout the day, and there are attendants whose sole job is to ensure that each gladiator is properly prepared for his patrons. These attendants are skilled in ways that have nothing to do with combat readiness. They know which oils make skin look healthiest, which techniques minimize the appearance of scars, and how to prepare a man's body for activities that would be considered shameful in any other context. The scheduling system is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire operation. Gaius maintains detailed records of each gladiator's appointments, noting patron preferences, duration of sessions, and any special requirements. The ledgers read like a grotesque parody of a normal business, with entries like Senator Flavius, 3 hours, Germanic type preferred, no witnesses, or Merchant Cassius, overnight session, discretion essential. These records serve multiple purposes. They ensure that the Ludus can maximize its revenue by efficiently managing its resources. They provide legal protection by documenting that all transactions are legitimate business arrangements. And they create a form of insurance, detailed records of which prominent Romans have patronized the establishment, information that could prove valuable if questions were ever raised about the Ludus's operations. The gladiators themselves have developed their own internal systems for coping with this reality. There's an informal hierarchy based not on fighting skill, but on the ability to attract and satisfy patrons. The most successful gladiators in this parallel economy enjoy privileges that have nothing to do with their performance in the arena. They get better food, more comfortable quarters, and sometimes even small amounts of personal money. Tips from satisfied customers that the lanista either doesn't know about or chooses to ignore. But success in this system comes at a psychological cost that's impossible to calculate. You watch these men train in the morning, their bodies moving with the fluid precision of professional warriors, and then you see them preparing for their evening appointments, transforming themselves into entirely different people. The compartmentalization required to survive this existence would challenge the sanity of anyone, no matter how strong. The most successful gladiators have learned to view their bodies as tools, separate from their essential selves. They can perform whatever acts are required of them while keeping their minds elsewhere, maintaining some core part of their identity that remains untouched by the degradation. It's a survival mechanism, but it's also a kind of death, the slow erosion of everything that makes a person human. As evening approaches and the first patrons begin arriving for their appointments, you realize that you're witnessing something that Rome's historians will spend centuries trying to forget. This isn't an aberration or a corruption of the gladiator system. This is the gladiator system, operating exactly as it was designed to operate. The arena fights were a spectacle, a public face for an industry that made its real money in private rooms with locked doors. The economics of human degradation. You spend your third day at the Ludus examining the financial records that Gaius keeps with obsessive precision, and the numbers tell a story that's somehow even more disturbing than what you've already witnessed. The economics of gladiator schools reveal a business model built on the systematic commodification of human dignity, where every aspect of a man's body becomes a source of revenue. The initial investment in a gladiator varies depending on the source. A prisoner of war captured in Germania might cost 500 denarii, about 2 years' wages for a skilled craftsman. A slave sold to pay his master's debts might go for 300 denarii. A free man who sold himself into gladiator school to escape overwhelming debt might command as much as 800 denarii, since his education and social background make him more appealing to certain types of patrons. But these purchase prices are just the beginning. The real expense comes in what the Romans euphemistically call development costs. Each new gladiator requires extensive training, not just in combat techniques, but in what Gaius delicately refers to as social skills. This training is conducted by experienced gladiators who serve as mentors, teaching newcomers how to survive their new reality. Marcus, a veteran gladiator who's been at the Ludus for 7 years, explains the process with the detached professionalism of someone who's learned to view horror as routine. The new ones always think it's about fighting. He tells you as you observe a training session. They imagine themselves winning glory in the arena, earning their freedom through courage and skill. We have to adjust their expectations. This adjustment process is systematic and brutal. New gladiators are gradually introduced to the reality of their situation through a series of carefully orchestrated experiences. First comes the realization that arena fights are rare and often fixed in advance. Then comes the introduction to patron services, initially presented as optional additional income. Finally comes the understanding that these services aren't optional at all. They're the primary purpose of the gladiator's existence. The psychological training is as intensive as the physical preparation. Gladiators learn to compartmentalize their emotions, to perform intimacy without feeling it, to maintain their sanity while their bodies are treated as rental property. Some adapt quickly, viewing it as just another form of survival. Others resist, and their resistance is gradually worn down through a combination of punishment, privilege withdrawal, and simple exhaustion. The revenue streams from a single gladiator are diversified in ways that would impress a modern business consultant. The most obvious income comes from standard sessions, private appointments that last anywhere from 1 to 3 hours and cost between 20 and 50 denarii, depending on the gladiator's popularity and experience. But the Ludus has developed numerous additional revenue sources that squeeze profit from every possible aspect of the gladiator's existence. Premium services command higher prices. Overnight sessions cost 200 denarii or more. Group sessions, where multiple patrons share a gladiator simultaneously, generate even more revenue while requiring only a single resource. Special themed experiences, where gladiators dress as specific characters or perform particular scenarios, add substantial markup to the base price. The most disturbing revenue stream involves what the ledgers euphemistically call breaking in sessions. New gladiators, particularly those who are young or physically attractive, command premium prices for their first appointments. Patrons pay extra for the privilege of being a gladiator's first customer, and the Ludus has developed an entire marketing strategy around this concept. Fresh arrivals are prominently displayed, their inexperience advertised as a selling point. These initial sessions are often traumatic, designed as much to break the gladiator's spirit as to satisfy the patron's desires. The psychological impact is intentional. A broken gladiator is a compliant gladiator, less likely to resist or cause problems for the Ludus management. It's a cruel calculation, but an effective one from a business perspective. The repeat customer base provides the ludus's most stable income. Regular patrons develop preferences for specific gladiators, creating what amounts to a subscription service. Senator Flavius, for example, visits twice a week, always requesting the same Germanic gladiator named Wolfgang. He pays a monthly rate of 800 denarii, which guarantees him priority access and ensures that Wolfgang is always available when requested. These regular arrangements create a twisted form of relationship between patron and gladiator. Some patrons bring gifts, food, clothing, small luxuries that the gladiator would never otherwise possess. The gifts aren't kindness. They're investments, ways of ensuring the gladiator's cooperation and enthusiasm. A gladiator who receives regular gifts from a satisfied patron becomes more valuable to the ludus, commanding higher fees and attracting more customers. The seasonal variations in demand reveal disturbing patterns about Roman society. Business peaks during religious festivals, when wealthy Romans feel the need to indulge their desires while simultaneously seeking spiritual purification. The Saturnalia festival in December is particularly profitable, as social conventions are temporarily suspended and behavior that would normally be scandalous becomes acceptable. Political events also drive demand. After major military victories, when Rome celebrates its dominance over conquered peoples, there's increased interest in gladiators from the defeated nations. Germanic gladiators became especially popular after Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, while Jewish gladiators saw increased demand following the destruction of Jerusalem. The ludus capitalizes on these trends, adjusting its marketing and pricing accordingly. The cost structure of running a gladiator school reveals the true priorities of the operation. Food expenses are minimized. Gladiators receive adequate nutrition to maintain their physical condition, but nothing more. Housing costs are kept low through overcrowding and minimal furnishing. Medical care is provided only when necessary to maintain the gladiator's earning potential. The largest operational expenses go towards security and discretion. The ludus employs a substantial guard force, not to protect the gladiators from external threats, but to prevent escapes and maintain order during potentially violent encounters with patrons. The guards are well paid and carefully selected for their willingness to look the other way when necessary. Bribery represents another significant expense. Local officials, tax collectors, and religious authorities all receive regular payments to ensure their continued cooperation. The ludus operates in a legal gray area, technically legal but socially questionable, and maintaining official approval requires constant financial lubrication. The most chilling aspect of the financial records is the depreciation schedule for gladiators. Like any other business asset, gladiators lose value over time. A prime gladiator might generate 100 denarii per week in his first year, but this income gradually declines as he ages, accumulates injuries, or simply loses his novelty. The ledgers track this decline with actuarial precision, noting when each gladiator's earning potential falls below the cost of his maintenance. When a gladiator's profitability drops too low, he faces several possible fates. If he's shown exceptional courage or skill in the arena, he might be granted freedom as a public relations gesture. More commonly, he's sold to a lower-tier ludus where standards and prices are reduced accordingly. The least fortunate are simply disposed of, a euphemism that Gaius uses when he thinks you're not paying attention. The retirement planning for gladiators is practically non-existent. Unlike other Roman professions, there's no expectation that a gladiator will accumulate wealth or property during his career. His entire adult life is designed to generate revenue for others, with no provision for his own future security. The few gladiators who do manage to buy their freedom typically do so with money obtained through illegal side activities, theft, gambling, or private arrangements with patrons that bypass the ludus's official channels. The economic success of the ludus has spawned imitators throughout the empire. What started as a single school in Capua has evolved into a network of interconnected businesses, sharing resources, trading gladiators, and coordinating their operations to maximize profits. The most successful last day have become wealthy men, building mansions, funding public works, and securing positions of social prominence built on the systematic exploitation of human beings. As you review the final pages of the financial records, one number stands out above all others: the return on investment for a typical gladiator. After accounting for purchase price, training costs, food, housing, medical care, and operational expenses, a gladiator generates an average profit of 300% over his useful lifetime. It's an extraordinarily successful business model built on a foundation of human misery that Roman society has learned to ignore: the patron class and their appetites. You spend your fourth day observing the patrons themselves, and what you discover forces you to confront the uncomfortable truth about who's really driving the demand for these services. The customers of gladiator schools weren't society's outcasts or marginalized deviants. They were Rome's elite: senators, merchants, military officers, and religious leaders who publicly championed traditional values while privately indulging in behaviors that contradicted everything they claimed to believe. The morning brings your first glimpse into the patron registration system. New customers don't simply walk in off the street. They're carefully vetted through a process that resembles membership in an exclusive club. Potential patrons must be recommended by existing customers, undergo background checks to ensure they can afford the services, and demonstrate their discretion through preliminary interactions with lower-tier gladiators. Ace maintains detailed files on every patron, records that would destroy careers and end political ambitions if they ever became public. These files contain not just names and preferences, but comprehensive psychological profiles that read like military intelligence reports. The information helps the ludus match patrons with gladiators who can best satisfy their specific desires, but it also serves as insurance against potential problems. Senator Marcus Antonius arrives for his weekly appointment just after the noon meal, and his entrance reveals the elaborate protocols that govern high-level patron interactions. He doesn't use the main entrance, instead arriving through a private gate that connects to the street behind the ludus. His litter is unmarked, his slaves are sworn to secrecy, and his movements through the facility follow predetermined routes that minimize the chance of encountering other patrons. Antonius has been a regular customer for over 3 years, and his preferences have evolved in ways that disturb even the jaded staff of the ludus. He initially requested simple companionship, conversations with educated gladiators who could discuss philosophy and literature. But his appetites have gradually become more extreme, requiring elaborate scenarios that blur the line between entertainment and genuine cruelty. His current favorite is a young Dacian gladiator named Decebalus, barely 18 years old and captured during the recent campaigns along the Danube. Decebalus was a prince among his people, educated in Roman customs and fluent in Latin, which makes him particularly appealing to patrons who enjoy the psychological satisfaction of dominating someone who was once powerful in his own right. The preparation for Antonius's sessions is elaborate and disturbing. Decebalus is required to dress in the ceremonial armor of a Dacian noble, complete with the golden turquoise and intricate metalwork that marked his former status. The role-play scenarios involve the reenactment of his capture, with Antonius taking the role of the conquering Roman general who has claimed the defeated prince as his personal trophy. What makes these sessions particularly grotesque is Antonius's insistence on historical accuracy. He's researched the actual details of Decebalus's capture, interviewed soldiers who participated in the campaign, and even commissioned artists to create props that match archaeological finds from Dacian royal sites. The level of effort he puts into recreating this trauma suggests a pathology that goes far beyond simple physical desire. Other patrons have their own distinctive patterns. Lucius Flavius, the senator you observed earlier, specializes in gladiators from recently conquered territories. His requests always follow the same template: He wants to civilize barbarians by teaching them proper Roman customs. The irony of receiving lessons in Roman morality from a man who's paying for sexual services seems lost on him entirely. Gaius Cassius, a wealthy merchant who made his fortune supplying the legions, prefers group sessions involving multiple gladiators simultaneously. His appointments require extensive preparation, with gladiators who might normally train together forced to perform acts that destroy any sense of camaraderie or mutual respect they might have developed. The psychological impact on the participants is severe, but Cassius pays premium rates that make it financially irresistible for the ludus. The religious patrons are perhaps the most disturbing category. These are priests, augurs, and other spiritual leaders who publicly preach about moral purity, while privately indulging in behaviors that contradict their own teachings. They often request gladiators who will play the role of penitent sinners seeking spiritual guidance, creating elaborate theological justifications for their actions. One regular patron, a high priest of Jupiter named Quintus Fabius, has developed an entire theology around his activities at the ludus. He claims that by providing physical pleasure to these gladiators, he's performing a sacred act of mercy, helping them achieve spiritual purification through submission to proper Roman authority. The intellectual gymnastics required to maintain this delusion would be impressive if they weren't so obviously self-serving. The military officers who patronize the ludus represent another distinct category. These men are accustomed to absolute authority over their subordinates, and their sessions often involve elaborate recreations of military discipline scenarios. They particularly favor gladiators who were once soldiers themselves, finding satisfaction in the complete reversal of traditional military hierarchies. Tribune Maximus Drusus, a veteran of the Germanic campaigns, exclusively requests Germanic gladiators who once fought against Rome. His sessions involve detailed reenactments of specific battles, with the gladiator forced to relive his defeat and capture, while Drusus plays the role of the victorious Roman commander. The psychological torture involved in these scenarios goes far beyond physical abuse, requiring the gladiator to participate in the celebration of his own people's destruction. The younger patrons, particularly those from wealthy families who haven't yet established their own political careers, often use the ludus as a form of advanced education. They're learning not just about physical pleasure, but about the exercise of absolute power over other human beings. These sessions serve as preparation for their future roles as senators, governors, and military commanders, teaching them to view certain classes of people as existing solely for their benefit. The fee structure for different patron categories reveals the ludus's sophisticated understanding of Roman social dynamics. Senators pay the highest rates, not just because they can afford them, but because their patronage provides protection and legitimacy for the operation. Military officers receive discounts, partly because their approval helps recruit new gladiators from prisoner of war populations. Religious leaders pay standard rates, but receive special services designed to help them maintain their public personas. The scheduling system accommodates the complex social requirements of the patron class. Morning appointments are reserved for patrons who need to maintain their public schedules, senators attending meetings, merchants conducting business, officers drilling their troops. Evening sessions cater to those who can afford longer appointments without arousing suspicion. The ludus even provides alibi services, creating believable explanations for patrons' absences that their households and associates will accept without question. The most successful patrons are those who bring other customers to the ludus. Antonius, for example, has introduced over a dozen new patrons during his 3 years as a customer. These referrals aren't casual recommendations. They're carefully orchestrated seductions, where experienced patrons gradually introduce potential customers to increasingly extreme experiences until they're too compromised to retreat. The blackmail potential of the patron lists is enormous, though it's never explicitly used. The ludus maintains its power through the implicit understanding that everyone involved has too much to lose if the arrangement becomes public. This creates a conspiracy of silence that protects the operation better than any security force could manage. The psychological profiles of regular patrons reveal disturbing patterns about power and sexuality in Roman society. Many of these men hold positions of absolute authority in their public lives. They command legions, govern provinces, or control vast commercial enterprises. Their private activities at the ludus represent an escalation of the power dynamics they're already accustomed to exercising. What's particularly chilling is how normal and rational these men appear in their daily lives. Antonius is known for his thoughtful speeches about Roman virtue. Flavius has funded public works projects and supported legislation protecting the rights of Roman citizens. Cassius is a generous patron of the arts who's commissioned beautiful temples and theaters. Their public personas show no hint of the private behaviors that define their true characters. The compartmentalization required to maintain this double life has profound implications for Roman society as a whole. If the empire's leaders can completely separate their public principles from their private actions, what does that say about the moral foundation of Roman civilization? The gladiator schools don't just exploit individual gladiators. They reveal the essential hypocrisy that underlies the entire imperial system. The psychology of survival. You wake on your fifth day at the ludus with a growing understanding that the most complex and disturbing aspect of this entire system isn't the physical exploitation. It's the psychological mechanisms that both perpetrators and victims have developed to make their daily existence bearable. The human mind's capacity for adaptation is both remarkable and terrifying. And nowhere is this more evident than in the mental strategies employed by gladiators to survive their circumstances. The morning training session provides your first glimpse into the psychological compartmentalization that defines gladiator existence. You watch Titus, the massive Gallic warrior, drilling with wooden swords alongside a dozen other gladiators. His movements are precise, powerful, and focused. He looks every inch the professional warrior that Hollywood would have you believe he is. But you know that in 3 hours, he'll be in a private room with Senator Flavius, performing acts that have nothing to do with combat prowess. What's remarkable is how completely Titus can inhabit these different roles. During training, he's the veteran fighter, respected by his peers and demanding in his instruction of newer gladiators. During his appointments, he becomes someone else entirely, subservient, accommodating, willing to participate in scenarios that would humiliate the warrior persona completely. The mental agility required to switch between these identities without losing his sanity is extraordinary. Marcus, the 7-year veteran who's become your informal guide to the psychological landscape of the ludus, explains the mental techniques the gladiators develop to cope with their situation. You learn to make your mind like a house with many rooms. He tells you as you sit in the shade between training sessions. Each room has different furniture, different purposes. When you're fighting, you live in the warrior's room. When you're working ... you live in a different room entirely. The trick is never to let the furniture from one room get mixed up with another. This compartmentalization is taught systematically to new arrivals. Experienced gladiators serve as mentors, passing down psychological survival techniques that have been refined over generations. The lessons are brutal in their practicality. How to dissociate during traumatic experiences. How to maintain dignity in undignified circumstances. How to preserve some essential core of self that remains untouched by external degradation. The gladiators have developed their own internal hierarchy that operates parallel to the ludus's official power structure. This hierarchy isn't based on fighting ability or patron popularity. It's based on psychological resilience and the ability to help others survive their circumstances. The most respected gladiators are those who can endure extreme situations while maintaining their capacity to protect and guide their fellow slaves. Spartacus, not the famous rebel leader, but a different man who shares the name, holds this kind of informal authority among the gladiators. He's been at the ludus for 9 years, longer than anyone except Marcus, and he's developed techniques for psychological survival that border on the mystical. During his appointments, witnesses report that he seems to leave his body entirely, becoming a hollow shell that performs the required actions, while his essential self remains somewhere else entirely. Spartacus teaches newer gladiators meditation techniques borrowed from various religious traditions, Stoic philosophy from Greek slaves, mystery cult practices from Egyptian captives, and warrior meditation from Germanic tribes. These practices help gladiators maintain their sanity by creating mental refuges that patrons can't access or contaminate. The relationships between gladiators are complex and often contradictory. During training, they function as a military unit, supporting each other and working toward common goals. But the realities of their situation create tensions that threaten these bonds. Gladiators who are more popular with patrons receive better treatment, creating resentment among those who are less fortunate. Competition for patron approval can destroy friendships and create bitter rivalries. Some gladiators form romantic relationships with each other, finding in these connections the only source of genuine intimacy available to them. These relationships are tolerated by the ludus management as long as they don't interfere with patron services. In some cases, they're even encouraged. Patrons pay premium rates to watch gladiators who are genuinely involved with each other perform for their entertainment. The psychological impact of these relationships is complicated. On one hand, they provide emotional support and genuine human connection in an environment designed to strip away humanity. On the other hand, they create vulnerabilities that can be exploited. A gladiator who loves another gladiator can be controlled through threats to his partner's safety or well-being. The suicide rate among gladiators is carefully managed by the Ludus administration. Desperate men will sometimes attempt to end their lives rather than continue their existence. But these attempts are usually prevented by constant surveillance and the removal of potential means of self-harm. The economic investment in each gladiator is too significant to lose to despair. So psychological support becomes a business necessity rather than humanitarian concern. Nicias, the Greek physician, has developed treatments for what he privately calls soul sickness, the deep psychological damage that results from prolonged exploitation. His remedies combine traditional medicine with newer techniques he's developed through observation and experimentation. He uses herbs to manage anxiety and depression, physical therapy to address the psychosomatic symptoms of trauma, and counseling techniques that help gladiators maintain their mental stability. But Nicias' most important function is serving as a witness to the gladiators' experiences. In a world where their suffering is systematically ignored or denied, having someone who acknowledges their pain provides crucial psychological support. Nicias remembers their stories, validates their emotions, and helps them maintain their sense of individual identity in a system designed to reduce them to interchangeable commodities. The religious practices among gladiators reveal their desperate search for meaning and dignity in circumstances that offer neither. Some embrace traditional Roman gods, hoping that proper devotion will eventually earn them freedom or at least better treatment. Others turn to foreign deities that promise justice in an afterlife, if not in their current existence. A few develop their own personal philosophies that help them maintain their sense of worth despite their circumstances. The most psychologically sophisticated gladiators develop what Marcus calls performance consciousness, the ability to recognize that their entire existence is a form of theater. They understand that the warrior persona they project during training is as much a performance as the submissive roles they play during patron sessions. This recognition doesn't make their situation less degrading, but it provides some psychological distance from the degradation. The gladiators' relationships with their own bodies become extremely complex. Their physical strength and appearance are their primary assets, but these same qualities make them valuable as sexual commodities. They must maintain peak physical condition to satisfy patrons while simultaneously detaching emotionally from their physical selves to survive the psychological trauma of their situation. Some gladiators develop elaborate fantasy lives that help them cope with their reality. They create detailed mental narratives about their past lives, their families, or their eventual freedom. These fantasies provide psychological refuge during difficult experiences, but they can also become so compelling that gladiators lose touch with reality entirely. The aging process presents unique psychological challenges for gladiators. As their physical condition deteriorates and their patron appeal diminishes, they face the terrifying prospect of becoming worthless to the ludus. The fear of disposal motivates some to extreme measures, dangerous physical enhancement practices, submission to increasingly degrading patron requests, or desperate attempts to escape that usually end in severe punishment or death. The few gladiators who do achieve freedom face enormous challenges in readjusting to normal life. Years of systematic dehumanization leave psychological scars that never fully heal. Former gladiators often struggle with basic social interactions, intimate relationships, and the simple concept of having choices about their own bodies and activities. The most disturbing aspect of the psychological survival mechanisms is how effective they are. The human mind's capacity for adaptation allows people to endure circumstances that should be unendurable. Gladiators develop techniques that enable them to function, to find moments of happiness, and even to form meaningful relationships within their constrained circumstances. This adaptability is a testament to human resilience, but it's also what makes the gladiator system sustainable. If people couldn't psychologically survive the experience, the entire business model would collapse. The breeding programs and fresh stock. Your 6th day at the ludus introduces you to perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire operation. The systematic breeding programs designed to produce a continuous supply of fresh stock for the establishment. What you discover challenges every assumption you might have had about the temporary or limited nature of gladiator schools. These aren't short-term businesses capitalizing on a temporary supply of prisoners of war. They're long-term enterprises with multi-generational planning that treats human reproduction as just another aspect of inventory management. The breeding quarters are located in a separate wing of the complex, carefully isolated from both the training areas and the patron facilities. The separation isn't for privacy or comfort. It's for business efficiency. Pregnant women and young children would interfere with the ludus's primary operations, so they're housed in facilities that resemble a cross between a nursery and a livestock barn. The women in these quarters come from various sources, but they all share the common fate of being selected specifically for their reproductive potential. Some are female slaves captured alongside the men who become gladiators. Others are purchased specifically for breeding purposes. Young, healthy women whose primary value lies in their ability to produce children who will eventually become gladiators themselves. The breeding program is managed with the same systematic precision that governs every other aspect of the ludus operation. Detailed records track each woman's reproductive history, noting the outcomes of previous pregnancies, the quality of offspring produced, and any complications that might affect future breeding potential. The record-keeping resembles veterinary documentation more than anything related to human healthcare. Cornelia, the matrona who supervises the breeding quarters, explains the selection criteria with the detached professionalism of someone discussing livestock management. We look for strong constitutions, attractive features, and docile temperaments, she explains as you tour the facilities. The children need to inherit physical capabilities that will make them valuable gladiators, but they also need to be psychologically suitable for training. Rebellious bloodlines are ... problematic. The mating process is entirely controlled by the ludus administration. Women don't choose their partners. They're assigned to specific gladiators based on genetic calculations designed to produce optimal offspring. The most successful gladiators are required to participate in breeding programs whether they want to or not. Their proven ability to survive and attract patrons makes their genetic contribution valuable to the ludus's long-term planning. The facilities for these encounters are clinical in their sterility. Private rooms equipped with comfortable beds and basic amenities, but no personal touches or opportunities for genuine intimacy. The breeding sessions are scheduled, monitored, and documented with the same systematic approach used for patron appointments. The only difference is that pregnancy, rather than immediate gratification, is the desired outcome. The psychological impact on both the gladiators and women involved in these programs is severe. For the gladiators, being used for breeding represents another form of bodily exploitation. Another way, their physical capabilities are treated as business assets rather than personal attributes. For the women, the systematic reduction of their reproductive capacity to commercial planning represents a particularly brutal form of dehumanization. Some breeding relationships develop into genuine emotional connections despite the coercive circumstances of their origin. These relationships are tolerated by the ludus management as long as they don't interfere with operations. In some cases, they're even encouraged. Emotional attachment between breeding partners can lead to more successful pregnancies and more psychologically stable children. The children born in the ludus face predetermined futures that make their parents. Circumstances seem almost enviable by comparison. From birth, they're evaluated for their potential value as future gladiators. Physical characteristics, temperament, and intellectual capacity are all assessed and documented in files that will follow them throughout their lives. The early childhood years are spent in communal nurseries where basic care is provided, but individual attention is minimal. The children are fed adequate nutrition to ensure proper physical development, but emotional nurturing is considered unnecessary and potentially counterproductive. Building strong emotional bonds might make the children less suitable for their eventual careers as sexual commodities. As the children grow older, they're gradually introduced to their future roles through what the ludus euphemistically calls preparatory education. This education begins with basic physical training, exercises designed to build strength, flexibility, and endurance. But it also includes more disturbing elements. Lessons in submission, training in personal grooming and presentation, and gradual desensitization to physical contact from strangers. The education provided to ludus-born children is comprehensive but narrowly focused. They learn to read and write, study basic mathematics, and receive instruction in history and literature. But their education is designed specifically to make them more valuable as gladiators. Literacy makes them more appealing to educated patrons who enjoy intellectual conversation. Historical knowledge allows them to participate in elaborate role-play scenarios. Literary appreciation enables them to understand and respond to patrons' references and allusions. The adolescent years represent the most crucial period in a ludus-born child's development. This is when their eventual specialization is determined based on their physical development, personality traits, and demonstrated abilities. The most attractive and physically impressive boys are groomed for the premium patron market. Those with exceptional intelligence might be trained for patrons who prefer intellectual stimulation alongside physical pleasure. Boys who show leadership potential are prepared for eventual roles as trainers or administrators within the ludus system. The selection process for these specializations is brutally practical. Children who don't meet the standards for any particular category face uncertain futures. Some might be sold to lower-tier establishments, where standards and prices are reduced accordingly. Others might be assigned to support roles within the ludus, maintenance work, food service, or administrative tasks. The least fortunate simply disappear from the records, their fate unrecorded and unremembered. The training regimen for ludus-born adolescents is more intensive and sophisticated than anything provided to gladiators acquired as adults. These young people have the advantage of beginning their preparation before their personalities are fully formed, making them more malleable to the specific requirements of their future careers. They can be shaped and molded in ways that adult captives cannot. The physical training is comprehensive, covering not just combat techniques, but also what the instructors delicately call client relation skills. Adolescents learn massage techniques, personal grooming practices, and social interaction skills that will make them more appealing to patrons. They study the preferences and personalities of the Ludus's regular customers, preparing themselves to satisfy specific demands before they ever meet their first patron. The psychological preparation is equally thorough. Ludus-born gladiators learn compartmentalization techniques from childhood, developing the mental flexibility that will allow them to function in their dual roles as warriors and sexual commodities. They're taught to view their bodies as tools, their emotions as controllable resources, and their dignity as a luxury they can't afford. The graduation ceremony for Ludus-born gladiators is a grotesque parody of traditional Roman coming-of-age rituals. At age 16, successful candidates are formally inducted into the gladiator ranks through ceremonies that combine elements of military oath-taking with elements of religious sacrifice. They swear allegiance to the Ludus, pledge to serve patrons faithfully, and commit themselves to upholding the reputation of the establishment. The first patron appointment for a Ludus-born gladiator is treated as a special event, commanding premium prices from customers who value the experience of breaking in, someone who has been specifically prepared for this purpose. These sessions are often traumatic despite the extensive preparation, but Ludus-born gladiators typically adapt more quickly than those who come to the profession as adults. The breeding programs have created multi-generational families within the Ludus system. Some facilities house second and third generation gladiators whose grandparents were original captives from foreign wars. These multi-generational gladiators represent the ultimate success of the breeding programs. Human beings who have been optimized for their roles through selective breeding and specialized training. The genetic diversity of the breeding programs is carefully managed to avoid the problems associated with inbreeding. The Ludus maintains connections with similar establishments throughout the empire, exchanging genetic material to ensure healthy offspring. The most successful breeding programs have developed bloodlines that are recognized throughout the gladiator industry for their superior qualities. The economic efficiency of breeding programs compared to purchasing adult gladiators is substantial. While the initial investment in breeding facilities and long-term care is significant, the per-unit cost of producing a gladiator through breeding is much lower than purchasing an adult slave. More importantly, Ludus-born gladiators typically have longer careers and higher patron satisfaction rates, making them more profitable over their working lifetimes. The breeding programs represent the ultimate evolution of the gladiator system from a temporary expedient using war captives to a permanent institution based on the systematic production of human commodities. These programs reveal the true nature of Roman attitudes towards slavery and human dignity, not as unfortunate necessities caused by war and circumstance, but as fundamental assumptions about the proper organization of society and the appropriate use of human resources. The medical apparatus of abuse. Your 7th day at the Ludus takes you deep into the medical facilities, where you discover that the healthcare system is as carefully designed for exploitation as every other aspect of the operation. The medical wing represents a grotesque perversion of the Hippocratic ideals, where healing arts are subordinated to business requirements and human suffering is managed rather than prevented or cured. The medical facility is extensive, occupying nearly a quarter of the Ludus complex. This isn't because the establishment prioritizes gladiator health. It's because the nature of their business creates medical problems that require constant attention. The inventory must be maintained in working condition, and the specific services provided to patrons create health challenges that go far beyond anything a normal physician would encounter. Nicias leads you through the various treatment areas, each designed for specific categories of medical problems. The trauma ward handles injuries from training accidents and arena fights, broken bones, sword cuts, concussions, and muscle tears. This is the most conventional medical facility in the complex. resembling what you might find at a military hospital or gladiator school, focused exclusively on combat training. But the trauma ward represents only a small fraction of the medical facility's actual workload. The bulk of Nikias's practice involves treating conditions that result from the Ludus's primary business activities. There are treatment rooms for various infections, specialized equipment for addressing internal injuries that couldn't possibly result from sword work, and a pharmacy stocked with remedies for conditions that would mystify physicians working in any other context. The infection control protocols reveal the scope of health problems created by the Ludus's operations. Nikias maintains detailed records of various sexually transmitted diseases, tracking their spread through the gladiator population and developing treatment regimens that minimize their impact on business operations. The goal isn't to eliminate these diseases. That would require fundamental changes to the Ludus's business model, but to manage them well enough to keep gladiators functional. The pharmaceutical inventory is disturbing in its comprehensiveness. Nikias stocks remedies for conditions ranging from simple digestive problems to complex psychological disorders. But the most extensive section of his pharmacy is devoted to drugs that facilitate the gladiators' work with patrons. These include substances that reduce inhibitions, medications that eliminate memories of traumatic experiences, and drugs that enhance physical performance while suppressing emotional responses. The surgical facilities are equipped for procedures that go far beyond treating combat injuries. Nikias has developed techniques for repairing damage caused by extreme patron activities, procedures that require both medical skill and absolute discretion. The operating theater is designed to muffle sounds, and the recovery rooms are isolated from the rest of the medical facility to ensure patient privacy during healing. The psychological treatment protocols represent perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the medical program. Nikias has developed therapeutic techniques specifically designed to help gladiators cope with their circumstances without encouraging resistance or rebellion. His psychological interventions are intended to maintain mental stability while preserving the compliance necessary for successful patron interactions. The treatment of gladiators who suffer complete psychological breakdown is particularly chilling. Those who become catatonic, violent, or otherwise unsuitable for patron services are housed in a special ward that resembles a combination of hospital and prison. The treatments used in this ward are experimental, often involving drugs and procedures that would be considered unethical in any other medical context. Nikias himself represents the compromise between medical ethics and economic necessity that defines the entire healthcare system. He's a skilled physician who could have practiced medicine in any major city of the empire, but his circumstances have forced him to adapt his knowledge to serve the Ludus's requirements. He treats gladiators with genuine care and professional competence, but within the constraints of a system that views them as business assets rather than human beings. The medical records maintained by Nikias provide a comprehensive documentation of the physical and psychological toll exacted by the gladiator system. These records track not just immediate injuries and illnesses, but long-term health trends that reveal the cumulative impact of prolonged exploitation. The data shows clear patterns of deterioration that affect all gladiators regardless of their individual resilience or coping mechanisms. The reproductive health services represent another specialized area of medical practice. Nikias provides health care for the women involved in breeding programs, managing pregnancies and deliveries with the same professional competence he applies to gladiator care. But his obstetric practice is complicated by the coercive nature of the breeding programs and the predetermined futures awaiting the children he helps deliver. The pediatric services for Ludus-born children reveal the systematic preparation for exploitation that begins from birth. Nikias monitors the physical development of these children, identifying potential health problems that might affect their future value as gladiators. His medical recommendations influence decisions about which children receive specialized training and which are deemed unsuitable for the profession. The geriatric care for aging gladiators is minimal, reflecting the economic reality that older gladiators generate less revenue and require more medical resources. Nicias provides palliative care for gladiators whose careers are ending, but his primary responsibility is to determine when a gladiator's medical problems make him too expensive to maintain. These determinations have life and death consequences that weigh heavily on Nicias' conscience. The medical facility's relationship with the broader Roman healthcare system is carefully managed to avoid scrutiny. Nicias maintains professional relationships with physicians in the city, occasionally consulting on complex cases or referring gladiators for specialized treatments. But these interactions are limited to avoid questions about the unusual patterns of injuries and diseases that characterize his practice. The training program for medical assistants reveals how the ludus creates its own healthcare professionals adapted to its specific requirements. Young slaves with aptitude for medical work are trained in techniques that wouldn't be taught in conventional medical schools. They learn to treat injuries without asking questions about their causes, to maintain patient confidentiality even under official questioning, and to prioritize business requirements over medical ethics when the two conflict. The medical facility's role in patron safety represents another important function. Nicias screens patrons for diseases that might be transmitted to gladiators, provides emergency treatment for patrons who are injured during their sessions, and maintains supplies of medications that might be needed to address patron medical problems. This service helps protect the ludus's reputation and reduces the risk of scandals that might threaten the operation. The research activities conducted by Nicias push the boundaries of medical knowledge in ways that would be impossible in any other setting. His unique patient population and the specific medical challenges they present have led him to develop new treatments and procedures that advance the field of medicine. But these advances come at the cost of human suffering and are built on a foundation of systematic exploitation. The medical records serve as insurance for the ludus against potential legal problems. Detailed documentation of all treatments provided to gladiators creates a paper trail that can be used to demonstrate proper care if questions are raised about gladiator health or welfare. These records also serve as evidence that the ludus operates within accepted medical standards, even if those standards have been adapted to serve commercial rather than humanitarian purposes. The disposal of medical waste reveals another disturbing aspect of the healthcare system. The volume and nature of medical waste generated by the ludus far exceeds what would be expected from a normal gladiator school. Special arrangements must be made for the safe disposal of materials that might reveal the true nature of the ludus's operations if discovered by city authorities. The collaboration between Nicias and the ludus administration in managing gladiator health represents a perfect example of how medical expertise can be co-opted to serve exploitative purposes. Nicias provides genuine medical care within the constraints of a system designed to maximize profit from human suffering. His medical knowledge is used to keep gladiators functional rather than to improve their overall well-being or address the root causes of their health problems. The medical facility ultimately serves as both a symbol of the ludus's sophistication and a testament to the systematic nature of its exploitation. The extensive medical resources demonstrate that the ludus understands and anticipates the health problems created by its business model, rather than questioning the ethics of activities that require such extensive medical support. The ludus has simply built the necessary infrastructure to manage the consequences of its operations. The network of corruption. Your 8th day at the ludus reveals the extensive web of corruption that makes the entire system possible. What you discover is that gladiator schools don't operate in isolation. They're supported by a complex network of complicit officials, corrupt institutions, and compromised individuals that extends throughout Roman society. The system's survival depends not just on the silence of its direct participants, but on the active cooperation of people who profit from maintaining the status quo. The morning brings a visit from Titus Cornelius Maximus, a senior tax collector whose official duties include assessing the Ludus's contributions to the imperial treasury. His inspection is thorough but selective. He examines records related to Gladiator purchases, training expenses, and arena revenues, but he conspicuously avoids any documentation that might reveal the true source of the Ludus's profits. His blindness to the obvious discrepancies in the financial records isn't accidental. It's a professional skill developed over years of selective enforcement. Cornelius's payment for this selective vision comes in multiple forms. The Ludus provides him with regular monetary payments that are carefully disguised as consulting fees for tax optimization services. He also receives complimentary access to Gladiator services, though his preferences run toward elaborate scenarios that require multiple participants and expensive props. The cost of satisfying his appetites is significant, but it's a necessary business expense that ensures continued governmental cooperation. The legal system's involvement in maintaining the Gladiator network is equally systematic. Magistrate Lucius Paulus makes regular visits to the Ludus, ostensibly to investigate complaints about Gladiator treatment or to ensure compliance with regulations governing slave ownership. These investigations invariably conclude that the Ludus operates within legal boundaries, despite evidence that would be overwhelming to any impartial observer. Paulus's legal protection of the Ludus is comprehensive. He dismisses complaints from family members of gladiators, rules against former gladiators who attempt to seek legal redress for their treatment, and interprets existing laws in ways that maximize the Ludus's operational freedom. His legal opinions have become precedents that protect similar establishments throughout the empire, creating a framework of jurisprudence that institutionalizes the exploitation. The religious establishment's complicity is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the corruption network. High Priest Quintus Fabius, whom you observed earlier as a patron, also serves in his official capacity as a spiritual advisor to the Ludus. He provides religious justification for the gladiator system, conducting ceremonies that sanctify the gladiator's servitude and offering theological arguments that frame their exploitation as divinely ordained. Fabius's religious services to the Ludus include regular purification rituals that cleanse patrons of spiritual contamination from their activities. These ceremonies allow patrons to maintain their public religious observances while continuing their private behaviors. The theological sophistication of these justifications is impressive, drawing on complex interpretations of Roman religious law to create loopholes that accommodate any conceivable form of exploitation. The military connection to the Gladiator network operates through multiple channels. Senior officers provide the Ludus with prisoners of war who become gladiators, often selecting the most attractive or psychologically suitable captives for this purpose, rather than assigning them to ordinary slave labor. These arrangements are facilitated through informal agreements that ensure profitable cooperation between military commanders and Ludus operators. Tribune Maximus Drusus serves as the primary military liaison to the Ludus, coordinating the supply of new gladiators and ensuring that military personnel understand the special nature of certain prisoner assignments. His role extends beyond simple procurement. He also provides security consultation, helping the Ludus develop procedures for managing potentially dangerous gladiators and preventing escapes that might embarrass his military colleagues. The medical establishment's involvement in the corruption network extends far beyond Nicias's direct services to the Ludus. The Guild of Physicians has developed professional standards that accommodate the unique medical requirements of gladiator schools, creating ethical guidelines that allow doctors to provide necessary services without questioning the circumstances that create the need for those services. Dr. Gaius Valerius Maximus, the head of the Physicians Guild, has established training programs that prepare doctors to work in gladiator schools and similar establishments. These programs teach medical techniques that wouldn't be covered in conventional medical education, including procedures for treating specific types of trauma and methods for managing the Psychological effects of prolonged exploitation. The banking system's role in facilitating gladiator operations reveals the deep integration of these establishments into Rome's legitimate economy. The ludus maintains accounts with the city's most prestigious banking houses, and its financial transactions are processed through the same systems used by senators, merchants, and religious institutions. The banks profit from the substantial cash flows generated by gladiator operations, while maintaining official ignorance about the source of those profits. Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of Rome's wealthiest bankers, has developed specialized financial products designed specifically for gladiator school operators. These include loans secured by gladiator assets, insurance policies that protect against gladiator mortality, and investment vehicles that allow wealthy Romans to profit from gladiator operations without direct involvement in their management. The entertainment industry's connection to gladiator schools extends beyond the obvious arena exhibitions. The ludus provides performers for private parties, religious festivals, and political events throughout the empire. These performances often involve the same gladiators who serve patrons in private sessions, but they're presented as legitimate entertainment that doesn't raise questions about the performer's other activities. The logistics network supporting gladiator operations is extensive and sophisticated. Specialized merchants provide equipment, supplies, and services that are unique to gladiator schools. These merchants understand the specific requirements of their customers and maintain discretion about the nature of their business relationships. The supply chain includes everything from specialized restraints to exotic costumes to medical supplies that wouldn't be needed in conventional gladiator training. The intelligence network that protects gladiator operations from official scrutiny is perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of the corruption system. The ludus maintains relationships with informants throughout the city who provide advance warning of potential investigations, policy changes, or shifts in public opinion that might threaten the operation. This intelligence network includes slaves working in government offices, freedmen employed by rival establishments, and even family members of official personnel. The blackmail potential inherent in the gladiator system creates additional layers of protection. The detailed records maintained by establishments like the ludus document the activities of hundreds of prominent Romans, creating an insurance policy against official action. Any attempt to shut down gladiator operations would risk exposing the participation of influential people who have the power to protect their own interests by protecting the system that serves them. The international connections of the gladiator network reveal that this isn't a uniquely Roman phenomenon. Similar establishments operate throughout the empire, and they coordinate their activities to maximize efficiency and minimize risk. Gladiators are traded between different regions. Successful business practices are shared among operators, and protective strategies are coordinated to ensure systemic survival. The educational establishment's role in perpetuating the gladiator system is subtle but crucial. Schools and tutors throughout the empire teach young Romans about gladiators in ways that romanticize their role while obscuring the reality of their circumstances. This educational indoctrination ensures that each new generation of Romans accepts the gladiator system as a natural and appropriate part of their civilization. The artistic community's participation in mythologizing gladiators serves the same function as the educational system. Painters, sculptors, and writers create works that present gladiators as noble warriors rather than exploited victims. These artistic representations shape public perception and make it easier for Romans to ignore the reality of what actually happens in gladiator schools. The corruption network that supports gladiator operations represents more than just individual moral failures or institutional weaknesses. It reveals the systematic nature of Roman exploitation and the extent, to which the entire society is implicated in maintaining systems that benefit the powerful at the expense of the powerless. The gladiator system couldn't survive without this network of corruption. But the network itself serves many other exploitative purposes throughout Roman society. The economics of empire. Your ninth day at the Ludus forces you to confront the uncomfortable truth that gladiator schools aren't aberrations within the Roman economic system. They're logical extensions of the principles that govern the entire empire. The exploitation you've witnessed represents the purest expression of Roman attitudes toward human resources, property rights, and the appropriate relationship between the powerful and the powerless. The morning begins with a meeting between Marcus Dives and a delegation of investors from throughout the empire. These men aren't visiting to satisfy their personal appetites. They're here to discuss business opportunities, franchise arrangements, and expansion strategies that will spread the Gladiator school model to new markets. The conversation reveals the systematic nature of Gladiator operations and their integration into Rome's broader economic planning. Gaius Octavius, a wealthy merchant from Alexandria, is considering establishing a gladiator school in his home city. His questions reveal sophisticated understanding of the business model and careful analysis of the Egyptian market's potential. The Alexandrian elite have developed expensive tastes, he explains to Dives, but they're also concerned about discretion. How do you balance operational visibility with client privacy? Dives' answer demonstrates the mature sophistication of the gladiator industry. Established operators have developed standardized solutions to common business challenges, creating what amounts to a franchise system for human exploitation. The technical knowledge required to operate a successful gladiator school is passed between operators through formal consulting arrangements and informal professional networks. The financial projections presented during this meeting reveal the enormous profitability of Gladiator operations compared to other Roman business enterprises. A well-managed ludus generates returns on investment that exceed those available from conventional activities like agriculture, manufacturing, or even money lending. The high profitability explains why so many wealthy Romans are willing to invest in establishments despite their controversial nature. The expansion strategies discussed by the investors focus on identifying markets with optimal combinations of wealthy clientele and available human resources. New Roman conquests provide both categories. Defeated populations become gladiators while their former oppressors, now integrated into the Roman economy, become potential patrons. The gladiator system literally feeds on the empire's military success. Marcus Crassus Dives explains his long-term business strategy with the same analytical precision that Roman generals apply to military campaigns. We're not just running individual establishments, he tells the assembled investors. We're creating an industry that will grow alongside the empire itself. Every new conquest brings fresh inventory and new markets. Every expansion of Roman civilization creates new opportunities for our services. The standardization of gladiator operations across the empire represents a remarkable achievement in business organization. Operators in different regions use similar training methods, pricing structures, and client management techniques. This standardization ensures consistent quality while reducing the operational risks associated with expansion into unfamiliar markets. The supply chain management for gladiator operations rivals the complexity of Roman military logistics. Successful operators maintain relationships with slave traders, military commanders, and government officials throughout the empire to ensure reliable access to new gladiators. The most sophisticated operations have developed exclusive arrangements with specific military units, guaranteeing first choice of prisoners from particular campaigns. The quality control standards applied to gladiator selection and training reveal the industry's maturation from opportunistic exploitation to systematic business practice. Experienced operators can evaluate potential gladiators with the same precision that horse traders assess breeding stock. They understand which physical characteristics, personality traits, and backgrounds will appeal to different patron categories. The pricing strategies employed by gladiator schools demonstrate sophisticated understanding of market segmentation and demand elasticity. Different patron categories pay different rates based on their ability to pay, their status requirements, and their specific preferences. The most successful operators have developed complex pricing models that maximize revenue while maintaining client satisfaction. The competitive dynamics within the gladiator industry have led to innovations that would be impressive if they weren't so horrifying. Operators compete by developing new services, improving facilities, and creating unique experiences that differentiate their establishments from rivals. This competition drives continuous innovation in methods of human exploitation. The integration of gladiator operations into Rome's legitimate financial system reveals the empire's fundamental acceptance of human commodification. Banks, insurance companies, and investment firms provide services to gladiator operators without moral reservations. The financial infrastructure that supports the empire's growth also facilitates its most exploitative enterprises. The tax revenue generated by gladiator operations represents a significant contribution to imperial finances. The ludus pays taxes on its property, its inventory, and its transactions just like any other business. The government profits directly from human exploitation while maintaining official ignorance about the specific nature of the activities being taxed. The regulatory framework governing gladiator operations demonstrates Rome's approach to managing controversial but profitable activities. Rather than prohibiting practices that generate tax revenue and satisfy elite desires, the government creates regulatory structures that legitimize exploitation, while providing oversight mechanisms that prevent the most egregious abuses. The labor economics of the gladiator system reveal Rome's fundamental assumptions about human value and the appropriate allocation of human resources. Gladiators represent the ultimate expression of slave labor, human beings whose entire existence is optimized to generate profits for their owners. Their training, maintenance, and utilization follow principles that Romans apply throughout their economy. The international trade in gladiators has created specialized markets and professional networks that span the empire. Successful gladiators are traded between establishments like valuable commodities, with their market prices determined by their proven ability to satisfy patrons and generate revenue. The most valuable gladiators command prices that exceed those of skilled craftsmen or educated slaves. The insurance industry's development of products, specifically designed for gladiator operations, reveals the systematic nature of the business. Insurance policies protect operators against gladiator mortality, patron injuries, and regulatory changes that might affect profitability. The actuarial calculations underlying these policies demonstrate sophisticated analysis of the risks inherent in human exploitation. The estate planning strategies employed by successful gladiator operators show how these businesses are designed for multi-generational wealth transfer. Ludus operations are structured as family enterprises that can be passed to heirs, with gladiator assets treated as any other form of inheritable property. Some of Rome's wealthiest families have built their fortunes on systematic human exploitation. The economic multiplier effects of gladiator operations extend throughout Roman society. Successful ludus operations generate demand for supporting services, construction, equipment manufacturing, food supply, medical care, and security services. The gladiator industry creates employment opportunities for free Romans while simultaneously exploiting enslaved populations. The social status implications of gladiator ownership reveal the complex relationship between wealth and respectability in Roman society. While the specific activities of gladiator schools are socially controversial, successful operators achieve significant social status through their wealth and political connections. Money earned through human exploitation purchases the same social advantages as money earned through any other means. The technological innovations developed by the gladiator industry have applications throughout Roman society. Medical techniques developed to maintain gladiator health, architectural innovations designed for ludus facilities, and management systems created for human inventory control are adapted for use in other contexts. The gladiator industry's role in Roman imperial expansion reveals the systematic nature of conquest and exploitation. New territories provide both markets for gladiator services and sources of gladiator inventory. The industry grows alongside the empire, creating economic incentives for continued military expansion and territorial acquisition. The economic analysis of gladiator operations ultimately reveals that these establishments represent Roman capitalism in its purest form. The systematic optimization of human resources to generate maximum profits for private owners. The moral questions raised by this system are secondary to its economic efficiency and its contribution to Roman prosperity. The legacy of systematic dehumanization your final day at the Ludus brings. A sobering realization about the true historical significance of what you've witnessed. The gladiator schools weren't simply businesses that exploited individuals. They were institutions that systematically undermined the fundamental concept of human dignity, creating precedents and practices that would echo through history long after the last gladiator school closed its doors. The morning begins with a conversation with Marcus, the veteran gladiator who has served as your guide through this psychological landscape. As he prepares for what might be his final patron appointment, his advancing age and accumulated injuries have made him less appealing to customers. He reflects on the broader implications of the system that has defined his adult life. You've seen how this place works, he tells you as you sit together in the morning sunlight. But I don't think you understand what it really means. This isn't just about gladiators, or even about slavery. This is about what happens when a society decides that some people aren't really people at all. Once you make that decision, once you accept that principle, there's no limit to what becomes possible. Marcus's observation cuts to the heart of the gladiator system's historical significance. The ludus doesn't just exploit individuals. It normalizes the complete commodification of human beings, creating social and legal precedents that make other forms of systematic exploitation seem reasonable by comparison. The techniques developed for managing gladiators become templates for controlling other populations. The legal framework that permits gladiator schools establishes principles that extend far beyond their immediate application. If human beings can be bought, sold, bred, and used for any purpose their owners desire, then the concept of inherent human rights becomes meaningless. The legal precedents created by gladiator operations provide justification for any form of exploitation that generates profit or serves elite interests. The medical establishment's adaptation to gladiator requirements demonstrates how professional ethics can be systematically corrupted to serve exploitative purposes. The techniques developed by Nicias and his colleagues for managing the health consequences of exploitation provide models for other situations, where human welfare must be balanced against economic interests. The medicalization of exploitation makes it seem scientific and rational rather than brutal and immoral. The psychological techniques developed by gladiators for surviving their circumstances represent one of history's most sophisticated studies in human adaptation to extreme circumstances. These survival mechanisms reveal both the remarkable resilience of the human spirit and the terrible cost of systematic dehumanization. The compartmentalization, dissociation, and emotional numbing that gladiators developed to survive their situation become models for psychological survival in other contexts of extreme oppression. The administrative systems created for managing gladiator operations provide templates for other forms of systematic exploitation. The record-keeping, scheduling, inventory management, and quality control techniques developed by ludus operators can be adapted for managing any population that has been reduced to commodity status. The bureaucratization of exploitation makes it seem routine and unremarkable. The breeding programs represent perhaps the most chilling aspect of the gladiator system's legacy. The systematic production of human beings, optimized for exploitation, demonstrates the logical endpoint of treating people as property. The genetic manipulation, controlled reproduction, and specialized training of Ludus-born gladiators provide models for other attempts to engineer human populations for specific purposes. The corruption networks that support gladiator operations reveal how systematic exploitation requires the complicity of entire social systems. The involvement of government officials, religious leaders, medical professionals, and financial institutions in maintaining the gladiator system demonstrates that large-scale human exploitation cannot occur without widespread institutional cooperation. The economic integration of gladiator operations into the broader Roman system shows how exploitation can become a foundation of prosperity and social stability. The taxes generated by ludus operations, the employment created by supporting industries, and the wealth accumulated by successful operators all contribute to Roman economic growth. This economic integration makes the gladiator system seem like a natural and necessary part of Roman civilization. The international expansion of the gladiator model demonstrates how successful systems of exploitation spread throughout empires and across cultures. The techniques developed in Roman ludus operations are adapted for different markets and different populations, creating a standardized approach to human commodification that transcends regional and cultural boundaries. The artistic and literary romanticization of gladiators provides a model for how societies can mythologize their most exploitative institutions. The heroic imagery that surrounds gladiators in Roman culture serves to obscure the reality of their circumstances while celebrating the system that exploits them. This mythologization makes exploitation seem glorious rather than shameful. The educational integration of gladiator mythology into Roman culture demonstrates how societies indoctrinate new generations to accept systematic exploitation as normal and appropriate. Children who grow up hearing stories about heroic gladiators learn to view human exploitation as entertainment and to see the victims of exploitation as willing participants in their own degradation. The social stratification reinforced by gladiator operations reveals how systematic exploitation serves to maintain existing power structures. The gladiator system doesn't just exploit individuals, it reinforces the social hierarchy by demonstrating the consequences of powerlessness while providing the powerful with entertainment that celebrates their dominance. The technological innovations developed by the gladiator industry have applications that extend far beyond their original context. The architectural designs, security systems, medical techniques, and management practices created for ludus operations can be adapted for controlling any population that needs to be contained and exploited. The psychological research conducted through gladiator operations provides insights into human behavior under extreme stress that have applications in many other contexts. The understanding of how people adapt to exploitation, resist authority, form relationships under duress, and maintain identity in dehumanizing circumstances becomes valuable knowledge for anyone seeking to control human populations. The precedents established by gladiator operations provide legal and moral justification for other forms of systematic exploitation. If society accepts that some people can be completely commodified for the entertainment and pleasure of others, then the principle underlying that acceptance can be extended to justify any form of exploitation that serves the interests of the powerful. As your time at the ludus draws to a close, you realize that you've witnessed more than just a historical curiosity or an example of ancient Roman decadence. You've seen a systematic approach to human exploitation that reveals fundamental truths about power, society, and the human capacity for both cruelty and adaptation. The gladiator schools weren't aberrations. They were logical expressions of principles that continue to influence human societies. The legacy of the gladiator system extends far beyond ancient Rome. The techniques, principles, and justifications developed by gladiator operators have been adapted and applied throughout history. Whenever societies have decided that certain populations can be exploited for the benefit of others, The systematic dehumanization perfected in Roman ludus operations provides a template that has been used repeatedly by different societies in different contexts. The ultimate lesson of the gladiator schools isn't about the specific exploitation of individual gladiators, disturbing as that exploitation was. It's about what happens when societies abandon the principle of universal human dignity in favor of systems that treat some people as property for the benefit of others. Once that principle is abandoned, once society accepts that systematic dehumanization can be justified by economic benefit or elite entertainment, there are no meaningful limits to what becomes possible. The Roman gladiator schools were temples to the worship of power over powerlessness, institutions that celebrated the complete subjugation of human beings for the pleasure of those who owned them. They represent one of history's most sophisticated and successful systems of systematic exploitation, and their legacy continues to influence human societies whenever the powerful decide that the powerless exist primarily for their benefit. The gladiators themselves, both those captured in war and those born into the system, represent the ultimate victims of this institutional dehumanization. Their stories, their resistance, their adaptation, their survival, and their destruction provide testimony to both the remarkable resilience of the human spirit and the terrible cost of systematic exploitation. They remind us that behind every system of oppression are individual human beings whose dignity and worth transcend whatever purposes others might assign to their existence. As you leave the ludus for the final time, you carry with you not just knowledge of a historical institution, but understanding of principles and practices that continue to shape human societies. The gladiator schools are gone, but the attitudes and assumptions that made them possible persist. Wherever people are treated as commodities rather than human beings, the true legacy of the gladiator system isn't in the past. It's in the continuing struggle between those who would exploit others and those who insist on the fundamental dignity of every human being. The systematic dehumanization perfected in Roman gladiator schools provides a warning about what becomes possible when societies abandon their commitment to universal human dignity. It reminds us that the fight for human rights isn't just about preventing individual injustices. It's about maintaining the fundamental principle that every person possesses inherent worth that cannot be compromised by the interests or desires of others. The gladiators' legacy isn't just their suffering. It's the ongoing responsibility to ensure that such systematic exploitation never again becomes an accepted part of human civilization. Asterisk. The shadows lengthen across the ludus courtyard as another day ends. But the questions raised by what you've witnessed will linger long after the last gladiator has returned to his cell. In their stories, we find not just historical curiosity, but urgent reminders about the eternal human struggle between dignity and exploitation, between the recognition of common humanity and the convenient fiction that some people exist primarily for the benefit of others. Asterisk.